Usually when we talk about drawing a map or like drafting a blueprint, there's this expectation of absolute unshakable precision. It feels almost comforting. You measure the topography, you draw that clean, solid black line to indicate a property boundary or a zoning district, and the surveyor just points at it and says, yep, there it is. That is the limit.
Right. It is entirely binary. It's quantifiable, it's verifiable, and visually unambiguous. As human beings, we are naturally drawn to that kind of certainty. We like things that can be easily categorized and, just solved with a calculator.
Inside the line, outside the line, clean.
Yeah.
But then you step into the world of professional urban and regional planning, and suddenly that precision drawing instrument just shatters in your hands. We're looking at a landscape that is, well, honestly, it's murky. You are just drawing lines on a piece of parchment. You're drawing lines directly through people's lives, their homes, their businesses, and their futures. You are literally shaping the reality of a community for decades, maybe centuries.
Which is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. You are moving from a space of technical, value-neutral map-making into a highly complex, fiercely debated realm of moral and ethical weight. Every line you draw distributes a resource, creates an opportunity, or potentially limits someone's quality of life.
Yeah, and that immense responsibility brings us to a quote that I just cannot stop thinking about. It was attributed to George Bernard Shaw, and it states, "All professions are conspiracies against the laity." Basically, ordinary people looking at professionals, doctors, lawyers, planners, and thinking you are all just in a club together, protecting your own interests and tricking the rest of us.
It is a devastating critique, but a vital one to grapple with. And it perfectly frames why we are having this deep dive today. If the public believes that planners are just a conspiracy of bureaucrats protecting their own self-interest, well, the entire foundation of the profession crumbles. The trust is gone.
Which is exactly why we are diving so deeply into this. If you are listening to this right now, I am speaking directly to you, the planner. You are diligently preparing for your professional certification exam, aiming for that RPP designation registered professional planner. And look, we know that studying for this exam can feel like standing at the base of an absolute monolith. There is so much material.
So many codes, so many regulations.
Exactly. It can feel like you are just cramming index cards into your brain.
And if you approach it as just a memorization exercise, you are going to struggle.
You really will. So our mission today is to completely deconstruct the Ethics and Professionalism course manual provided by the Professional Standards Board for the Planning Profession in Canada and the Ontario Professional Planners Institute. We're going to systemically unpack modules 1 through 7. We're not just going to read you the rules. By the end of this deep dive, you are going to understand the underlying philosophy, the architecture of public trust, and the real-world application of every ethical framework you need to pass this exam and practice as a professional planner.
Because passing this exam requires you to internalize a profound truth, which is that the legitimacy of your entire profession rests on whether you can navigate those muddy waters without losing your moral compass. If you deeply understand the why behind the rules, the what and the how will become second nature on exam day.
So true. Okay, let's establish the baseline. Before we can even talk about how a professional should behave, we have to ask a deceptively simple question: what even is a profession? In modern English, we use that word for literally everything. If you get a paycheck for playing basketball, you're a professional athlete. If you get paid to fix a sink, you're a professional plumber.
Right, but the academic regulatory definition that the exam focuses on is far more stringent, tremendously so. And to understand why, you have to look at the etymology and the history of it. The root of the word comes from the Latin professio, which literally means a public declaration or an avowal. Historically, it was actually tied to taking vows.
Wait, like religious vows?
Precisely. The earliest acknowledged occupational specializations were the clergy and the military. These were groups set apart from the general laity. They required a specific calling, a period of intensive training, and a public declaration to serve a higher purpose, whether that was a divine order or the defense of the realm. Over centuries, as society moved away from strict tradition and began relying more heavily on accumulated specialized knowledge, this concept evolved. You saw the emergence of law and medicine as recognized professions.
And eventually the trade guilds, right, where they started to formalize who is actually allowed to be a silversmith or a mason.
Yes, exactly. The guilds were crucial because they introduced the idea of self-regulation. They formalized training, they strictly regulated who could enter the trade, and they standardized the quality of the work and what practitioners were actually paid.
Got it. And when did this formalized structure of regulated professions actually take root in Canada? Because we know the exam loves historical context.
It does. The first regulated occupations in Canada date back to the late 18th century, and they were heavily modeled on the British system. The law societies were the pioneers here. Quebec established one in 1765, and Upper Canada followed in 1797. Medicine came shortly after. Then, as society became more complex throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the public started demanding greater protection from incompetence in other fields. So provincial governments started establishing regulatory bodies for dentists, pharmacists, land surveyors, architects, engineers, and eventually accountants and planners.
So the government steps in because the public says, hey, we can't tell who is actually a good doctor and who is just a guy with a saw and a bottle of whiskey.
Pretty much, yeah.
But that still doesn't give us a hard definition of what separates a true profession from just a highly skilled occupation. The manual cites a foundational 1966 study by Ernest Greenwood called The Elements of Professionalization. He laid out 5 essential elements. Let's walk through these because they are foundational. If you're listening, you might want to jot these down.
Greenwood's 5 elements are an excellent framework to commit to memory. Element number 1, a profession must have a basis of systematic theory.
Meaning you can't just be winging it based on a hunch.
Exactly. It is not just practical on-the-job training. There is a body of abstract, complex knowledge that has to be mastered. Element number 2, there must be authority recognized by the clientele. The client believes that the professional possesses a knowledge that the client does not, which grants the professional authority in that specific realm.
So when I go to my doctor, I defer to her authority on my health because she has the systemic theory that I lack.
Correct. Element number 3 is broader community sanction and approval of that authority. It is not just the individual client. The whole society recognizes and validates the profession's authority, usually by granting them certain powers or monopolies. Element 4, a formal code of ethics regulating relations with both clients and colleagues.
Which separates it from a purely commercial transaction.
And finally, element number 5, a professional culture sustained by a formal professional association. There has to be a community of peers that reinforces the norms, the values, and the continuous learning of the group.
The source material also brings in other theorists, Wasserman, Sullivan, and Palermo, who argue that a formal educational program is the absolute prerequisite. They list criteria like a university-level education in a special area of knowledge and an internship or supervised entry-level performance. But there's one criteria they list that I find absolutely fascinating, which is the requirement for the unique exercise of learned judgment.
That is perhaps the most critical distinction of all. If you can solve a problem simply by opening a technical manual and following the instructions step by step to arrive at the guaranteed correct answer, you are engaging in a highly skilled occupation.
Like fixing a transmission on a specific car model.
Precisely. But in a profession, every single situation is unique. There is no manual that tells a planner exactly how to rezone a specific block in a specific neighborhood with its own unique demographics, economic pressures, and environmental constraints. The planner has to take the abstract theory they learned in university and apply independent, learned judgment to that completely novel situation.
It's the difference between applying a formula and synthesizing a solution. And Wasserman also points out that professions have a distinct identity, a uniqueness, which they establish through organizations, academic journals, and rigorous standards for certification.
Which brings us to the very cornerstone of how professions operate legally, which is the concept of self-regulation.
Right, and the text is incredibly explicit about this. Autonomy, the ability for a profession to govern itself, is not a right. It is a privilege. It is earned by the profession and granted by society through the government. But why? If I'm the government, why would I hand over the power to regulate planners to the planners themselves? Doesn't that just invite that conspiracy against the laity that Shaw warned about?
That is the million-dollar question, and you absolutely must internalize this for the exam. The government does not grant self-regulation for the benefit of the professionals. It is not designed to make planners wealthier, to give them prestige, or to protect them from free market competition. The government grants this privilege specifically, exclusively, and entirely to protect the public interest.
Okay, break that down for me. How does letting planners regulate planners protect the public?
Because the body of knowledge, that systematic theory we talked about, is so complex that the average citizen and even the average politician cannot adequately evaluate the competence of a practitioner. The government recognizes that only an architect truly knows what makes a building structurally sound, and only a planner truly understands the cascading impacts of a regional transportation policy. Therefore, the government says, we will grant your association the power to control your membership, set your educational standards, and discipline your own members. But only on the strict condition that you use that power to protect the public from harm caused by incompetent, negligent, or unethical planners. It is a grand bargain. It is a conditional transfer of authority.
And if the profession breaks that bargain?
If a profession fails to protect the public, if they start operating like a protection racket that just shields bad planners from consequences, the government can and absolutely will step in and revoke that self-regulatory privilege. It has happened to other regulatory bodies in the past.
So, understanding that this is a grand bargain to protect the public, we need to look at how that regulation actually manifests in Canadian law. Because it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. There are three distinct tiers or levels of regulation in Canada: registration, certification, and licensure. Let's unpack the differences, because I guarantee you will be tested on the distinctions. Start at the bottom tier, which is registration.
Registration is the weakest, least stringent form of regulation. Essentially, the only requirement is that a person's name is listed on a register maintained by a specified body. There might be some basic criteria to get on the list, but it offers very little in the way of robust public protection or exclusive rights.
It's basically a directory.
Exactly.
So, moving up a tier, we hit certification.
Certification is a significant step up. It provides an occupational group with the monopoly use of a specific professional designation, often referred to as a reserved title. If you meet the rigorous academic qualifications, pass the exams, and get the requisite experience, you get to use the title.
In this case, RPP.
Correct. It protects the public by making it highly transparent who is legitimately qualified and who isn't. However, and this is the absolute crucial distinction, certification does not prohibit someone without the title from doing the actual work.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I have this locked in. Certification is like being a certified master sommelier. It is incredibly difficult to achieve. You have to know the soil composition of a vineyard in France from memory. But it is not illegal for me, someone with zero qualifications, to pour a glass of wine at a restaurant. Anyone can pour the wine. But only the person who passed the exam can put certified master sommelier on their business card. It is a right to title.
That is a perfect analogy. You have a legally protected monopoly on the title, but you do not have a monopoly on the task itself.
Which brings us to the ultimate, highest level of regulation: licensure.
Licensure is the most restrictive form of regulation. It provides an occupational group with a virtual, legally enforced monopoly on who can practice in a specified domain. To get a license, you need specific academic study, a defined period of supervised work experience, and you must pass a licensing exam. If you succeed, you are issued a license to engage in practice or to perform what are legally called controlled acts.
So, sticking with my analogies, licensure is like being a medical doctor. It is not just about having the exclusive right to put the title MD on my door. It is literally illegal for me to perform an appendectomy in my garage, regardless of what I call myself. Even if I say, hey, I'm an amateur surgeon, I'm not claiming to be an MD, I will go to prison. That is right to practice. Literally no one else is allowed to do the work.
Exactly. The risk of public harm is deemed so astronomically high that the government restricts the actual physical tasks to licensed individuals only.
So where does the planning profession in Canada sit on this three-tier ladder?
Historically, and in the vast majority of jurisdictions today, places like Ontario, Alberta, Nova Scotia planners operate under certification. It is a right-to-title regime. You can be an RPP, a registered professional planner. The public knows you meet the gold standard. But an unlicensed individual, say a retired real estate agent or just an enthusiastic citizen, can still legally offer planning services or submit a development application on behalf of a client.
But the landscape is shifting, isn't it? The source material specifically calls out Saskatchewan.
Yes, and this is a massive point of pride and evolution for the profession. Under the Community Planning Profession Act of 2013, Saskatchewan achieved right to practice for planners.
Wow. Wait, so how do they pull that off? Because to move from certification to licensure, to convince the government to outlaw anyone else from doing the work, you have to prove something huge, right?
You have to prove undeniable potential for public harm. You have to clearly demonstrate to the legislature that incompetent or unethical conduct by planners doesn't just result in an ugly building, but that it causes genuine, measurable, devastating harm to the public, whether that's environmental destruction, economic ruin for a municipality, or severe threats to public health and safety through poor infrastructure planning. Saskatchewan planners successfully made the case that planning is a controlled act that demands a monopoly to keep the public safe.
So whether a planner is operating under a right to title in Ontario or right to practice in Saskatchewan, earning that designation is a massive societal privilege. The government has handed over a tremendous amount of trust, and that trust demands a strict, unwavering adherence to ethics, which is the perfect pivot point to ask, why is the planning profession so incredibly concerned about practitioner ethics right now? Like, we're in Module 2 now.
To really grasp that, we first need to define what ethics actually is, beyond just a buzzword. The root word is ethicus, which translates to character. Broadly speaking, it is the study and philosophy of human conduct, with a specific emphasis on the determination of right and wrong.
The manual breaks the philosophy of ethics down into three branches. There is meta-ethics, which sounds like something you'd study in a very late-night college dorm room. It asks the giant abstract questions like, what does the word good actually mean? Or are morals objective realities or just human inventions?
Right, it's the theoretical foundation. Then you have normative ethics, which moves a step closer to reality. It focuses on the criteria for what forms of behavior are right or good. It attempts to establish standards or norms for conduct.
And finally, we arrive at applied ethics, which is where planners actually live and breathe. Applied ethics addresses how a professional takes those normative standards and applies them to specific, complex, messy situations in their daily practice.
Let's use a quick analogy. Meta-ethics is asking, what is the fundamental nature of water? Normative ethics is asking, what are the biomechanics of the proper swimming stroke? Applied ethics is asking, there is a person drowning in a rip current. How do I safely execute a rescue right now without both of us drowning?
Oh, I love that. And to guide professionals in that applied real-world rescue, organizations create codes. But just like regulation has tiers, not all codes are created equal. The manual identifies three distinct types of codes, and if you're taking the exam, you absolutely need to know the difference. Let's start with codes of ethics.
Codes of ethics are aspirational. They are broad statements of general philosophical principles that define the overarching moral scope of the profession. They are vision-based. They are designed to inspire you, to remind you why you chose to become a planner in the first place.
So they aren't necessarily something you get sued over. They are more like, we strive to build beautiful, equitable communities.
Exactly. They aren't normally intended to be strictly enforced in a punitive, legalistic way, because it's very hard to prove someone didn't strive for beauty. Then you have codes of conduct, sometimes called codes of practice.
And these are the ones with teeth.
Very sharp teeth. These are far more prescriptive. They present established specific rules for forms of behavior that should be encouraged or strictly barred. They are comprehensive, and crucially, they form the basis for internal disciplinary processes. If you violate a code of conduct, you aren't just falling short of an ideal, you are breaking a rule, and you can be formally sanctioned, fined, suspended, or entirely expelled from the profession.
Wow. And the third type is codes of misconduct.
Codes of misconduct are the absolute minimum legal requirements a professional must meet. They are clear, unambiguous statements of acts of professional misconduct. Failing to meet this bare minimum standard doesn't just mean a disciplinary hearing with your peers. It means clear legal liability for negligence in a court of law.
So bringing it back to the current state of the profession in Canada, why is there such a hyper-focus on ethics right now? Why is this manual so thick? The text lists 8 specific reasons, and I think they paint a fascinating picture of the modern pressures on a planner. First off, there are heightened expectations from society.
Yes, and this links directly back to that George Bernard Shaw quote. There is an increasing public skepticism of authority and of professionals in general. We live in an era of 24/7 news cycles and social media, where the media is constantly reporting on professionals, politicians, CEOs, doctors, and yes, planners failing to meet standards. The public is deeply worried that professionals are just protecting their own self-interest. Planners have to actively fight that perception every single day to maintain their social license to operate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Reason number 2 really caught my eye, which is that planners need to be sensitized to the values underlying planning. I think there used to be this perception, maybe back in the 1950s, that planning was a pure value-neutral math problem. You have a growing population, you calculate the traffic volume, you draw a highway on the map, you build the highway. It was seen as purely technical expertise.
That was the dominant paradigm for a long time. But the modern realization is that planning is inherently, unavoidably value-laden. Every single technical decision you make distributes resources, impacts marginalized communities, and has deep moral content. Deciding where to put a new waste management facility or a six-lane highway is not just engineering. It is a profound ethical decision about which neighborhood is forced to bear the burden of pollution and noise, and which neighborhood gets a faster commute to the suburbs. There is no such thing as a value-neutral line on a map.
Right. Reason 3 is about promoting the self-evident public good. The argument here is simple. The more demonstrably competent and ethical the practice of planners is across the board, the greater the public trust in the profession. Reason 4 is about fostering the capacity to critically reflect on the code itself and improve it.
Because a code of conduct cannot be a static, sacred text carved in stone. Society evolves, technology evolves, and the code has to evolve with it. Planners need the ethical literacy to debate and update their own rules.
Yeah. Reason 5 is about demonstrating the need to be proactive in establishing a standard of practice specifically, the need for independent, objective opinions. You can't just be a yes man for a developer or a mayor. Reason 6 is massive, and I think it's what keeps a lot of planners up at night, alerting members that the courts are prepared to review and intervene in planning decisions.
This is a monumental shift in the legal landscape. We have seen cases brought to the Divisional Court in Ontario and even appealed all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada that show planning decisions are under intense, unprecedented judicial scrutiny. Historically, tribunals like the Ontario Municipal Board were given broad deference. But now, courts have ordered the reassessment of tribunal decisions. The message is clear: planners can no longer hide behind bureaucratic process and assume their decisions are final and immune from judicial review. If your process is ethically flawed, a judge will strike it down.
Which ties perfectly into reason. 7 test cases in law now exist where individual planners have been found personally liable. It's not just a municipality getting sued anymore. The planner's individual work is being scrutinized against expected social and professional norms. If you fall short, you face real legal consequences. And finally, Reason 8, a robust code, helps distinguish the planning profession by showing the public that planners possess the capacity to think rigorously and systematically about ethical issues, setting them apart from mere technicians.
If we synthesize all 8 of those reasons into one core takeaway for the exam, it is this knowing that every single action you take has moral weight, economic consequence, and legal liability. You must understand exactly who you are obligated to serve and how to navigate the inevitable conflicts that arise between them.
Which opens the door to Module 3, probably the most complex part of a planner's daily life: professional obligations and responsibilities. The manual starts by making a very clear distinction between permissions and obligations. Permissions are areas where individual subjective judgment is allowed. For example, as a private consultant, you have the permission to choose not to take on a specific client if you don't like their project. But obligations are matters where individual judgment or preference is not permitted. You cannot choose to neglect an obligation.
And as a professional planner, your obligations are divided among 3 distinct parties. Your first-party interests are the providers of professional services. This means your obligations to the profession itself, to your regulatory institute, and to your colleagues. Your second-party interests are your clients, if you are a consultant, or your employer, if you work for a municipality or agency. Your third-party interests are the general public.
And the public is a big category.
It is the biggest. It includes the community residents, those who didn't hire you, those who might actively oppose your project, and crucially, future generations who will have to live with the infrastructure you designed today.
Trying to balance the demands of the profession, your boss who signs your paycheck, and the citizens who are shouting at you in a town hall meeting is where things get incredibly messy. And that leads us directly into the terrifying, high-stakes world of conflicts of interest. This is guaranteed exam material. The manual defines a conflict of interest generally as a situation where an individual has personal interests that may improperly influence their professional judgment.
And we have to ask, what exactly constitutes a personal interest? It is much broader than a briefcase full of unmarked bills. Interest can be direct or indirect. A direct benefit is when the planner themselves receives the benefit. An indirect benefit is when a family member, a close friend, or a business associate benefits from the planner's decision.
Okay, let me throw a scenario at you to test the boundaries of this. Let's say I am a municipal planner. My spouse is a partner at a private law firm. A major developer comes to me with a massive subdivision application.
Mm.
The developer says, listen, if you can expedite this approval and give us a favorable recommendation, we will hire your spouse's law firm to handle all the hundreds of real estate closings for these new homes. I am not getting a single dollar directly from the developer. Is that a conflict?
That is a textbook indirect financial benefit. You aren't receiving a check with your name on it, but the massive fee stream flowing to your spouse's firm directly impacts your household income, your standard of living, and your personal interests. Your professional judgment on that subdivision is now hopelessly compromised. It is absolutely a conflict of interest.
Wow. What about non-financial benefits? Let's say I don't care about money at all, but I am desperate to be appointed to the board of directors for a highly prestigious local art museum. A developer who sits on that board comes to me and says, approve my controversial high-rise zoning variance, and I will personally guarantee you get a seat on the museum board next month.
It is still a massive conflict. The benefit does not have to be monetary to be corrupting. A direct non-monetary benefit, prestige, power, influence, social standing that could improperly influence your objective professional judgment falls right into the trap.
The manual lists 8 specific conflict of interest scenarios
Yeah.
that every exam taker needs to be able to identify in a multiple-choice question. Let's go through them, and let's paint a picture for each one. Number 1, having a direct or indirect beneficial interest in an outcome.
A classic example here is a private consulting planner agreeing to take 3 premium lots in a new subdivision as their payment, rather than charging a standard hourly fee. Suddenly, the planner is no longer objectively evaluating the subdivision. They are financially invested in maximizing the value of those specific lots, potentially at the expense of good planning principles like adequate parkland or stormwater management.
Number 2 is the acceptance of gifts. And this isn't just about someone handing you cash.
No, it's the subtle things. It's the developer taking you out for a $300 steak dinner, offering you free tickets to the hockey playoffs, or paying for your flight to a conference. It also includes kickbacks or split commissions. The perception of influence is so high here that many municipalities now have explicit zero-tolerance policies. You can't even accept a cup of coffee.
Right. Number 3 is moonlighting. Let's invent a character here. Let's call him Bob.
Right.
Bob is a senior planner for the city of Springfield. He works 9 to 5, reviewing zoning applications. But Bob wants to pay off his mortgage faster, so at 8 p.m., he opens his laptop and runs Bob's zoning consultancy.
Bob is walking into a minefield. Moonlighting is holding a second position that might compromise your primary diligence or loyalty. The danger isn't just that Bob is tired. The danger is that Bob might start taking consulting fees from the exact same developers he's supposed to be objectively regulating during his day job. Or Bob finds himself in a situation where he has to represent a private client appearing before a municipal committee in his own city during his normal work hours. It is an untenable blurring of lines.
Number 4 is representing both parties. You can't be a consultant hired by a municipality to draft a new regulatory policy on supportive housing while simultaneously secretly being paid by private housing organizations to lobby the city to make those exact same regulations looser. You are quite literally negotiating against yourself.
Number 5 is known as by matter of record. This one is subtle but critical. Imagine you are a planner who 2 years ago took a very strong, highly publicized position vehemently opposing a specific highway expansion because of environmental concerns. Today, you are hired by the Transportation Authority and you suddenly release a report saying the highway expansion is perfectly fine.
People can ask questions.
Exactly. There is an immediate perception of conflict. The public will ask, what inducement was offered to make them completely reverse their core professional opinion? The code doesn't say you can never change your mind as facts change, but you have an ethical obligation to clearly, thoroughly, and publicly explain the empirical rationale for the change to offset that perception of corruption.
Number 6 is self-dealing. This is using your public sector position to acquire work for an outside private firm that you or a family member owns. Number 7 is gaining private advantage from employer resources. If you are moonlighting, you absolutely cannot use the city's expensive licensed GIS mapping software on your office computer to do the work for your private consulting gigs.
And number 8 is the use of proprietary or confidential information. If you gather highly sensitive, confidential market data while working for client A, you cannot use that insider knowledge to make real estate investments for yourself, nor can you use it to give client B an unfair competitive advantage.
And finally, a sort of unofficial 9th scenario selling influence. This is the retired public sector planning director who immediately opens a private lobbying firm and leverages their deep personal relationships with their former junior staff to get favors and expedited approvals for private clients.
Now, all of those are conflicts of interest, but the manual introduces a separate, equally important category, conflicts of obligation. This isn't about getting a kickback or a financial benefit. This is about a situation where your duties to different parties collide and you fail to meet the expected standard of professional conduct toward one of them.
Okay, let's break down those duties. To your colleagues in the profession, the first party, your obligations include honesty, which the text explicitly says includes sharing information that prevents others from being misled. You also owe fairness and competition, loyalty to the profession, and the maintenance of competence through continuous learning.
To your clients or employers, the second party you owe competence, diligence, and honesty. But you also owe candor. Candor is more than just not lying. It means full, proactive disclosure. It means actively telling your client or boss the bad news along with the good, even if it might cost you the contract. You also owe discretion regarding confidentiality and, notably, loyalty and obedience.
Wait, let's pause right there. Obedience. Because if I am a junior planner, I need this job to pay my rent. If my employer tells me to do something, my instinct is to obey. But the manual has a massive flashing neon caveat here. You owe your employer obedience, but only lawful direction. And in this context, lawful includes following the code of ethics.
This is one of the most difficult pressures a planner faces. An employer has every right to expect you to follow administrative protocols, show up on time, and manage budgets. But an employer absolutely cannot force a professional planner to substitute the employer's judgment for their own independent professional judgment.
Okay, let's play this out. I'm a municipal planner. I've done the environmental analysis on a proposed riverfront development. The data shows it is a severe flood zone. Building there is dangerous. The mayor calls me into his office and says, listen, this developer is a huge donor. We need the tax revenue. I am directing you to rewrite the report and state that the flood risk is minimal so we can approve the permits. What do I do?
You cannot obey that directive. You are obligated to refuse. If you rewrite that report, you are violating your primary duty to the third party, the public. Your obligation to the public includes non-malfeasance, which means doing no harm. Allowing homes to be built in a dangerous flood zone is doing harm. You must exercise your independent professional judgment, even if it puts you in direct conflict with your employer.
Wow. So knowing that these conflicts of interest and conflicts of obligation are everywhere, how do we handle them when they inevitably pop up? The text gives two primary strategies, avoidance and mitigation.
Avoidance is always the best route. Remove the temptation entirely before it even materializes. If you work in government, this often means putting your investment assets into a blind trust or completely divesting from any local real estate holdings that could conceivably intersect with your planning work. It also includes proactive, preemptive disclosure, like signing an annual declaration of any investments or board memberships so your employer knows exactly where you stand.
But sometimes you can't avoid it. You didn't buy the land, but your sister's the one submitting the development application. In that case, you have to mitigate it. And mitigation starts with disclosure. You must disclose the conflict at the earliest possible opportunity to your employer or client, and you should always do it in writing to create a record. But disclosure isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. Saying, hey boss, just so you know, my sister is the developer, doesn't mean you can then go ahead and approve her permit. Disclosure must almost always be followed by recusal.
Recusal is absolute. It means completely and totally removing yourself from any participation in the process. You don't just declare the conflict, you physically step out of the room when the file is discussed. You do not review the documents. You do not offer casual advice to the staff member who takes over the file. You don't even talk about it at the office water cooler. You must have zero involvement, direct or indirect.
And the ultimate benchmark for all of this, the standard the disciplinary committee will hold you to, is what the manual calls the reasonable person test. I like to call it the front page news test.
It is a vital concept. It does not matter if your judgment wasn't actually compromised. You might possess the moral fortitude of a saint. You might be completely capable of reviewing your sister's application with ruthless, unbiased objectivity. But that is irrelevant. If a reasonable, neutral observer looking at the situation perceives that there is a conflict of interest, the damage to the public trust is already done. Perception is reality in professional ethics.
The test is basically how embarrassed would I be and how bad would it look for the city if a journalist discovered what I've done and put it on the front page of tomorrow's paper. If the answer is very, you are in a conflict. Navigating these landmines requires a deeply internalized ethical framework. You can't just memorize the rules, you need a philosophy to fall back on. Which brings us to Module 4, the Ethical Planning Practitioner.
The manual outlines that the ethical practitioner stands on two foundational pillars: competence and integrity. Competence means knowing your stuff, mastering the systemic theory, understanding the laws, and committing to continuous learning because the field is always changing. Integrity means an unconditional commitment to a principled approach. It means honesty, avoiding deception, and fiercely guarding your professional judgment from bias.
And maintaining that integrity is arguably harder now than it has ever been because the environment of planning is changing so rapidly. We aren't in the post-WWII era anymore. Back then, there was broad, unified public consensus that building a massive highway network was just unquestionable progress. It was a simpler time to be a planner. Today, we are dealing with hyper-complex regional scale issues. We have diverse populations with entirely conflicting cultural values about how space should be used. We have aging infrastructure that costs billions to replace, and we are constantly facing charter rights challenges regarding housing and equity.
Because of this staggering complexity, planners can no longer rely on a single monolithic worldview. What worked in 1955 will fail catastrophically today. To address this, the manual highlights the work of planning scholar Sue Hendler, who outlined 6 distinct ethical theories applied in planning. Think of these not as strict rules, but as different lenses through which a planner can view a complex problem. A truly competent planner needs to understand how to look through all of them.
Okay, this is prime exam material, so let's unpack these 6 theories deeply. If you're listening, visualize this. Theory number 1 is utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism is fundamentally about consequences. The moral worth of an action is determined entirely by its outcome. The goal is always to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number of people. In planning, this is the dominant lens, and it is most commonly seen in cost-benefit analysis. You weigh the total economic and social costs against the total benefits to society as a whole, and if the benefits outweigh the costs, the action is deemed ethically good.
Let me push back on that because that sounds logical, but it also sounds potentially ruthless. Let's say we need to build a new regional hospital. It will serve 500,000 people and save thousands of lives. That is a massive greatest good. But to build it, we have to use eminent domain to bulldoze a small, historic neighborhood of 50 homes belonging to a marginalized community. Through a utilitarian lens, the planner says, sorry to those 50 families, but 500,000 people need this hospital. The math works. Bring in the bulldozers.
And that is precisely the dark side of utilitarianism. It can easily become a tyranny of the majority, where the rights of the few are sacrificed for the benefit of the many, which is exactly why a planner cannot rely on just one lens. To balance that ruthless math, a planner must also look through the second lens, Kantian ethics.
Named for Immanuel Kant.
Yes. Kantian ethics focuses on basic, inherent moral rights and duties. Actions are judged by their inherent rightness, their adherence to universal duties, regardless of the consequences. A Kantian argues that individuals have fundamental rights that cannot be violated, even if violating them would benefit the majority.
Where do we see this in daily planning?
You see it constantly in committees of adjustment or zoning variances. A minor variance might be granted to a homeowner, not because it benefits the whole city, it doesn't, but because the individual property owner has a basic, inherent right to the reasonable enjoyment of their land, provided it doesn't harm someone else's inherent rights. It is a defense of the individual against the collective.
Theory number 3 is the Rawlsian perspective, from philosopher John Rawls.
Rawls focused deeply on justice and fairness, specifically concerning the disadvantaged. He introduced the concept of the veil of ignorance. If you were designing a society without knowing where you would end up in it, like if you didn't know if you'd be rich, poor, healthy, or disabled, you would design it to protect the most vulnerable. A Rawlsian approach in planning prioritizes the voices, needs, and outcomes of marginalized, vulnerable, or historically disadvantaged populations.
So if a planner realizes that traditional town hall meetings are only attended by wealthy retirees who own cars, and they design a special multilingual public participation process that goes directly into a low-income, transit-dependent neighborhood to ensure those specific voices are elevated, they are actively applying a Rawlsian lens.
Precisely. They are structuring the process to ensure fairness for the disadvantaged. Theory number 4 is communitarianism.
This one sounds a bit warmer.
It is. Communitarianism appeals to a shared sense of community identity, shared values, and mutual obligations to that community, rather than just treating society as a collection of isolated individuals pursuing their own preferences. It argues that a good society requires a strong social fabric. In planning, this lens influences how we design public squares, community centers, and social housing. We aren't just housing people, we are trying to foster a shared civic identity and interaction.
Okay, theory number 5 is environmental ethics.
This broadens the ethical circle to include the natural world. Planners often apply Aldo Leopold's famous land ethic, which says humans are just plain members and citizens of the biotic community, not conquerors of it. The key ethical debate here for planners is whether environmental features like a local wetland or an old-growth woodlot have intrinsic value, meaning they are valuable in and of themselves regardless of humans, or if they only have instrumental value, meaning they are only valuable because humans use them for recreation or flood control.
Right, and the final theory, number 6, is feminist ethics.
In the context of planning, feminist ethics is a critique of traditional, top-down, rational, comprehensive planning, which was often male-dominated and hierarchical. It translates to an emphasis on an ethics of care, collaboration, consensus building, recognizing emotion and lived experience as valid data, and the active eradication of oppression. Projects like empowerment zones or deeply collaborative, community-led neighborhood revitalization plans draw heavily on this ethical basis.
What's truly fascinating, and what the exam will want you to grasp, is that a competent planner doesn't just pick one of these theories and stick with it for their whole career. You might need to use different lenses for different phases of the exact same project. You might use a Rawlsian lens to design your community outreach to ensure marginalized voices are heard, a feminist lens to build consensus during the meetings, but ultimately rely on a utilitarian cost-benefit lens to justify the final routing of a billion-dollar regional transit line to the funding agencies.
Exactly. They are versatile tools in your ethical toolkit. But to use those tools effectively, especially in a public forum, you must practice rigorous critical thinking. And that means you must be able to spot and dismantle logical fallacies. The manual explicitly lists several forms of flawed reasoning that planners will encounter daily from politicians, developers, and angry citizens, and that planners must be careful not to use themselves.
Oh, this is the fun part. Let's go through the greatest hits of flawed reasoning. Because if you sit in a city council meeting for more than 20 minutes, you will hear every single one of these. First up, faulty analogy.
This is when someone compares two things that share some superficial similarities but are fundamentally different in ways that invalidate the comparison. A politician might say, this high-density zoning issue is exactly the same as the one we approved on the east side of town last month, so we should just vote the same way to save time. A planner knows that every site has unique context, different traffic patterns, different soil conditions, different neighborhood demographics. The analogy is faulty.
Next is faulty generalization. This is treating all members of a broad group as if they share the exact same characteristics or needs. For example, a planner, assuming that a policy designed to help homeless single men will perfectly serve the needs of homeless single mothers with children. It's an assumption that leads to disastrous policy failures.
Then there is the red herring. This is dragging a completely distracting, highly emotional, but ultimately irrelevant piece of information into an argument to confuse the issue and derail the conversation.
The manual actually has a wild, very specific example for this one. Imagine a senior planning director is accused of inappropriate conduct towards female staff members. During the formal HR investigation, the director suddenly introduces allegations that the department has a history of racial bias in its hiring practices. He does this to distract everybody, bog the investigators down in a completely different issue, and take the heat off his own misconduct.
It is a deliberate diversionary tactic, and people fall for it constantly because the new issue is also important, even though it's irrelevant to the specific argument at hand. Another common trap is proving a negative.
I hear this one in infrastructure meetings all the time.
Yes. This occurs when an opponent demands that you prove a negative impact will never happen in the future, which is logically impossible. A citizen stands up and says, "Prove to me that this new bypass road won't cause traffic jams 50 years from now." You can present models and projections, but you cannot absolutely prove a negative about the distant future. It's an unfair shifting of the burden of proof.
Begging the question.
Aye.
This is using language tricks, words like obviously, clearly, or it logically follows, that to state an unproven assertion as if it were an established fact. Obviously, high-density housing brings crime, so we must reject the permit. They haven't proven the link. They just smuggle it in with the word obviously.
Equivocation is next. This is a slippery one. It involves using the same term in two different senses within the same argument to deceive the listener. The classic philosophical example is the argument, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And the opponent replies, then let's ban bullets. It plays on the mechanics versus the agency of the act. In planning, someone might advocate for affordable housing, meaning market-rate starter homes, while the community thinks they mean subsidized social housing.
Ad populum, or appealing to the people. This is bypassing logic entirely and just using emotionally loaded words to rile up the crowd. Using words like family-friendly, protecting our children, or neighborhood character to advance an argument without any data. Or, conversely, using words like greedy developers, mean-spirited, or bureaucratic elites to attack a plan, rather than dealing with the actual traffic studies or economic facts.
Closely related is the ad hominem attack. This is attacking the character, motive, or personal traits of the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument itself. You can't trust the consultant's transit plan because she drives an expensive imported sports car and doesn't even ride the bus. Her car choice has no logical bearing on the mathematical validity of her transit model.
And finally, a classic, post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore, because of this.
This is the confusion of correlation with causation, assuming that because event B happened chronologically after event A must have caused event B.
This ruins cities if planners fall for it. People do this at city council meetings constantly. They will stand up and say, you built that separated bike lane on Main Street in 2022. By 2024, 3 local businesses on that street closed. The bike lane killed the businesses. But they're completely ignoring the fact that a massive global recession happened in 2023, or that a huge big box store opened a mile away. As a planner, if you fall for that post hoc trap, you end up ripping out perfectly good, safe infrastructure based on a total logical illusion.
So, if you manage to master these 6 ethical theories, and if you successfully dodge all of these logical fallacies in your thinking, what is it all for? What is the ultimate target you are aiming at? That brings us to the most debated, nebulous, and vital concept in the entire profession, which is the public interest.
Right, so Module 5 focuses entirely on this. The public interest is the ultimate standards guiding the planning profession. Every code, every rule, every decision is supposed to serve it. But defining what the public interest actually is feels like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
It is incredibly difficult, and the definition has evolved radically over time. Historically, it was much easier to define. In the immediate post-war era, following the sweeping 1947 Town and Country Planning Act in Britain, there was a unitary, almost unquestioned consensus.
What was the consensus?
Survival and basic health. The public interest was obvious: provide clean drinking water, build sanitary sewers, separate heavy, polluting industrial factories from residential housing, and clear out disease-ridden slums. The public interest was measurable in terms of lower cholera rates and basic safety.
But the manual points out that this unified vision doesn't last. In the 1960s, thinkers like Charles Lindblom and the legendary Jane Jacobs completely blew that consensus up.
They did. Lindblom argued that modern society had become so complex with such a plurality of competing, valid interests that a centralized, top-down, comprehensive master plan that serves everyone equally is a mathematical impossibility. Jane Jacobs famously attacked the sweeping urban renewal projects of the Robert Moses era, calling for smaller, localized, tailored interventions that respected the intricate social ballet of the sidewalk.
So the concept of a single, unifying public interest splittered is shattered into fractured, competing, localized, and often entirely contradictory interests.
Exactly. So today, planners are left with the monumental task of trying to define and serve the public interest in a profoundly fractured world. To help make sense of this, the text cites theorists Campbell and Marshall, who outline 3 contemporary approaches to understanding the public interest. The first is the utilitarian approach. We discussed this earlier. The public interest is simply the sum of all individual interests, the greatest good for the greatest number. But as we noted, critics argue this completely ignores minority rights and localized harm.
The second is the process-based approach. I find this one fascinating because it shifts the focus entirely. This approach argues that you can't predefine the outcome. Instead, the public interest is found by ensuring you have an inclusive, radically transparent, perfectly fair democratic dialogue. If the process is fair and everyone gets a seat at the table, whatever outcome the stakeholders eventually agree on is, by definition, the public interest.
It is deeply democratic. But critics of the process-based approach point out a glaring flaw. It relies on the assumption that consensus is always possible. If people refuse to compromise, or if the process is hijacked by well-funded special interests who can afford to attend endless meetings, you get market-driven outcomes, or pure gridlock, not the public interest.
And the third approach is the shared values approach.
This is a more communitarian view. It suggests that despite our fractures, there are fundamental societal obligations and shared overarching community values like sustainability, human rights, or basic equity that go beyond just adding up what individuals currently want.
This highlights a crucial distinction that the exam will definitely try to trick you on the difference between public opinion and public interest. They sound similar, but ethically they are not the same thing.
They are profoundly different. Public opinion is simply what people say they want in a given moment. It is the result of a poll. It is finding out what the loudest stakeholders think. But public interest requires professional synthesis. It requires active listening, probing those initial statements to find the root issues, and then applying professional expertise to balance those competing needs against long-term realities to reach a best fit solution.
The manual uses a fantastic, highly realistic example of downtown intensification. Let's walk through this, because this is exactly the kind of scenario the exam will test you on. Imagine you are proposing a shiny, high-density, mixed-use condo tower in a neighborhood that is currently composed of older, affordable, low-rise rental triplexes.
A classic modern planning conflict. Let's look at the competing interests. The utilitarian municipal perspective might say, build the tower. It significantly broadens our municipal tax base, it brings in construction jobs, and it efficiently utilizes existing downtown water and transit infrastructure.
But the current residents and a planner, using a Rawlsian perspective, will argue, wait a minute, you are destroying existing community cohesion. You are displacing low-income renters who have nowhere else to go in an expensive city just to build luxury condos for the wealthy.
Meanwhile, the private developer's primary interest is leveraging their land asset for maximum financial profit. And the broader regional public policy interest might be mandating maximum density in the downtown core, specifically to prevent urban sprawl from destroying the agricultural greenbelts on the edge of the city.
So you have tax revenue, affordable housing, developer profit, and environmental protection all colliding on one city block. How on earth does a planner balance that without just guessing?
The text suggests relying on the classic sustainability model, visualizing it as a Venn diagram. You have three circles: economic considerations, social considerations, and environmental considerations.
Okay, let's overlap them. Where the economic circle and the social circle overlap, you get equity, a fair distribution of resources and jobs.
Where the social circle and the environmental circle overlap, you get bearability, a community that is healthy, safe, and pleasant for humans to actually live in.
Where the environmental circle and the economic circle overlap, you get viability, a local economy that functions without destroying the natural resources it relies on.
And right in the center, the tiny sliver where all three circles perfectly overlap, you achieve true sustainability. The ethical planner's job is to continually push the project design toward that center. And importantly, while balancing these vocal interests, the planner has an ethical duty to speak for what we call the unrepresented stakeholders.
Who are they?
Future generations. They cannot attend a Tuesday night town hall meeting to vote on a 50-year infrastructure bond. And the natural environment, a watershed, cannot fill out an online survey about a new industrial park. The planner has an affirmative ethical duty to ensure those silent voices are heavily factored into the balance.
The final, tangible output of all this incredible balancing act is what the Canadian Institute of Planners Code of Professional Conduct, Section 2.1, calls the independent professional planning opinion. That is what you were paid for. And the code mandates that this opinion must be defensible, transparent, entirely free of personal or corporate bias, and it should respect employer values unless those values conflict with the code itself.
And we must emphasize the word transparent here. Gathering public input, listening to everyone, and then locking yourself in a windowless office to make a decision by yourself is not transparent. Even if your decision is technically brilliant, if marginalized groups don't clearly understand how you weighed their input to reach your recommendation, they will assume they were ignored.
And as we established earlier, perception is reality.
Exactly. If they perceive they were ignored, the public trust is broken. You have to engage, inform, get feedback, promote open discussion, and clearly publicly show the math on how the competing interests were weighed to arrive at your independent opinion.
So we have covered a massive amount of ground. We have the history of professions, the branches of ethics, the obligations to three parties, the theoretical lenses, the logical fallacies, and this monumental goal of balancing the public interest. But how does the profession actually enforce all of this in the real world? When a planner crosses the line, what happens? That brings us to our final deep dive into Modules 6 and 7, Codes of Ethics and Practice in Action.
As we discussed at the beginning, enforcement happens on two tracks. There is external legal action through the civil courts for negligence or harm, which is why all private planners carry extensive errors and omissions insurance. But the core mechanism for maintaining the profession's self-regulatory privilege is the internal disciplinary process.
And those internal processes can result in severe consequences. Formal reprimands, hefty fines, mandatory retraining, suspensions, or permanent expulsion from the institute, which strips you of your RPP title. And the rulebook they use for this discipline is the CIP Code of Professional Conduct.
The code is elegantly structured into three main sections, aligning with the three parties we discussed earlier. Section 1 deals with obligations to the public. Section 2 deals with obligations to clients and employers. Section 3 deals with obligations to the profession and colleagues. The manual provides highly specific examples of breaches for these rules, and they are incredibly illuminating. Let's walk through some of the most critical ones.
Let's start with Section 1, the public. Rule 1.2 requires planners to provide full, clear, and accurate information on planning matters to decision makers and the public while recognizing the need for confidentiality.
A clear breach here would be a planner intentionally releasing confidential proprietary financial information about a developer's land acquisition strategy when they were specifically legally requested not to do so. Conversely, Rule 1.3 requires planners to acknowledge the interrelated nature of planning decisions and their consequences for the natural and human environment.
What does a breach of 1.3 look like?
Imagine a planner acting as a consultant for a developer. The planner knows that a specific stormwater engineering requirement is absolutely necessary to protect the downstream public from severe flooding. But the requirement is very expensive. To save the client money and make the project look more profitable, the planner recommends to the city that the requirement be eliminated, downplaying the environmental risk. That is a massive breach of 1.3.
Wow. Section 2, which deals with clients and employers, is an absolute minefield of potential conflicts. Rule 2.7 states that you cannot accept financial or other inducements that could be perceived as compromising your independent judgment.
A blatant breach here is a consulting planner providing an artificially rosy biased conclusion in a feasibility report submitted to a regulatory body, entirely in exchange for the client's promise to give the planner's firm all the lucrative future design work on the project. They traded their objectivity for future cash.
Rule 2.8 is also very strict. You cannot accept a bonus payment or a contingent fee based on a planning approval being achieved.
This is critical. If a lawyer goes to court, they can sometimes take a case on contingency. They only get paid if they win. Planners cannot do this. Your fee cannot be contingent on getting a yes from the city council. If your paycheck depends on getting an approval, you are no longer an objective professional. You are an advocate with a financial stake in the outcome. You must charge for your time and expertise, regardless of the final decision.
And then there is Rule 2.9, which I like to call the double agent rule. It explicitly states you cannot act as a consultant for a private developer on a project in a municipality while simultaneously providing professional planning advice to that same municipality on matters that affect that developer.
Because it is impossible to serve two masters with competing interests, you cannot advise the city on how to extract maximum community benefits from a developer while simultaneously advising the developer on how to minimize their costs to the city.
Talk about a front-page newspaper scandal waiting to happen. Imagine the headline, City Planner Advising Mayor, also paid by condo developer. That scenario destroys the public trust instantly, not just for that planner, but for the entire profession.
Moving to Section 3, the profession and colleagues. Rule 3.7 states you can only sign or seal a document that was actually prepared by you or meticulously checked and supervised by you.
This happens more often than people think. A classic breach is a seasoned planner sealing a younger friend's site plan without actually thoroughly reviewing the math and the zoning compliance, simply to do them a favor or save them time. If that plan has a fatal flaw, the planner who sealed it is fully liable.
And Rule 3.8 is the enforcer rule. It requires you to report the behavior of any fellow member whom you reasonably believe to be in serious breach of the code.
So you can't just look the other way.
No. Turning a blind eye to a colleague's corruption or severe incompetence is, in itself, a violation of the code. The profession can only self-regulate if the members actively police each other.
To really drive all of this home, Module 7 offers a comprehensive case study that pulls everything, the theories, the fallacies, the conflicts, and the code into one messy, realistic scenario. Let's unpack it.
Imagine a senior planner working for a mid-sized municipality. She has been tasked with creating a comprehensive housing study. At the same time, there is a massive, highly publicized political priority coming from the mayor's office. The city has a severe shortage of seniors housing, and the mayor wants to push through a controversial plan to convert several underutilized elementary schools into seniors' residences. The planner has been heavily advocating for this plan.
Okay, so the planner is invested in the seniors' housing solution. But here's the twist. While conducting her housing study, she receives brand new, highly accurate demographic data. She analyzes it and discovers that while the schools are underutilized today, a massive boom in the preschool-age population is occurring. Within 5 years, the city is going to desperately need those exact elementary schools to handle the influx of children.
So she is faced with an intense professional dilemma. She has hard data showing the school infrastructure will be critical for children very soon, but her current, highly favored plan solves an immediate, noisy political crisis for seniors, and it will make her look like a hero to the mayor.
So what does she do? She decides to sit on the new demographic data. She hides it in her desk drawer for a few weeks until her seniors' housing proposal is formally voted on and adopted by the council. She rationalizes her deception by telling herself, I am serving a greater public good for these vulnerable seniors, and besides, the school space isn't actually needed today.
How does the exam want you to break that down? Because on the surface, a utilitarian might argue she housed a lot of seniors.
But she broke the rules to do it. You have to apply the formal logic of the code. Let's dismantle her actions. By deliberately hiding the demographic data to achieve her own politically preferred outcome, the planner made a formal recommendation based on a severely incomplete analysis, deeply influenced by her personal bias and desire to please the mayor.
Exactly. First, she violated Section 1.2 of the code, failing to provide full, clear, and accurate information on planning matters to decision makers. The city council voted on the school conversion based on a lie of omission.
Second, she violated Section 1.3. She completely failed to acknowledge the interrelated consequences of her decision for the human environment.
Yeah.
Namely, by destroying the schools now, where exactly are the thousands of new children going to go to school in 5 years? She ignored the future stakeholders.
And third, she violated Section 2.2, failing to undertake her professional services with diligence and competence. Hiding relevant data is the opposite of diligence.
It is a perfect, tragic example of a planner thinking they're acting like a superhero, convinced they are serving a greater good by cutting corners, but actually acting completely unethically. She lost her objectivity, hid the facts, and ultimately harmed the long-term public interest of the city.
And that is the ultimate lesson of the ethics manual. You do not get to unilaterally decide what the public interest is by suppressing data or manipulating the democratic process. Your sworn obligation is to present all the accurate data, clearly articulate the conflicting interests, and provide an independent, transparent, professional opinion on how to balance them, even when it is politically unpopular.
Okay, let's bring this entire deep dive together. What have we learned? If you take nothing else into the exam room, remember this: earning the RPP designation is a massive, profound societal privilege. The government gives you the autonomy to regulate yourselves, but only on the strict condition that you rigorously, fearlessly protect the public interest.
It means moving far beyond technical map making or running traffic algorithms. It means stepping into the realm of moral leadership. You are the guardian of the public trust. You are tasked with managing incredibly complex stakeholder Venn diagrams, balancing the needs of the economy, society, and the environment. And you must maintain absolute, unshakable integrity against a constant daily barrage of conflict of interest traps and political pressures.
And as you prepare for this exam, and more importantly, as you prepare for the next 40 years of your career, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We talked a lot about the evolution of the profession, from the clergy to the guilds to modern certification. But what is the next evolution?
As the tools of planning become more advanced, as artificial intelligence begins generating optimal zoning models, running instantaneous traffic fleet charts, and automating massive, complex cost-benefit analyses, your raw technical skills will matter less and less. And AI will soon be able to draw a more mathematically precise line on a map than you ever could.
Good.
But your ethical judgment will matter more and more. If an algorithm can optimize a city for pure, ruthless efficiency, it takes a human planner grounded in moral philosophy, attuned to the nuances of justice, and bound by a code of conduct to optimize that city for equity, for bearability, and for human dignity. The AI doesn't understand the Ralsian veil of ignorance. It doesn't understand the inherent dignity of a marginalized neighborhood. Only you do.
Wow. Are you ready to be that human in the room? Think about that as you study. Remember, you aren't just memorizing administrative rules to pass a test. You are preparing to make decisions that will literally shape people's realities in concrete and steel for generations to come. You are stepping into the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of community building. We wish you the absolute best of luck on your professional exam. Keep studying, keep questioning the simple answers, and keep diving deep.